Vesta was founded in Boston, Massachusetts in 2013. And over a decade, the Vesta organization has helped over 10,000 people navigate divorce to achieve a healthier outcome. We are divided into different geographical hubs. Tonight, you're with us in the Central Massachusetts hubs, but we have professionals from all different divorce adjacent fields. So we have attorneys, mediators, coaches, financial professionals, and they all work together and work collaboratively to help you get through your own divorce process. The hubs are popping up all across the country, even though we started here in New England. New hubs just recently opened up in New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Colorado. So the movement is really catching on and growing, which we are so thrilled about. As you heard from Mandy, Vesta has a dedicated team of empathetic concierge specialists who will help guide you through your process and connect you with resources and different professionals based on the stage of your divorce and your specific needs. And that concierge service is complimentary to the Vesta community. It's free for everybody. And as Mandy said, you'll be receiving a call, but also don't hesitate to reach out to them on your own. So I will introduce myself and then I'll pass it around to give everybody a chance to say hello before we dive into our topic tonight. My name is Jolie Vacchi, and I am the founding attorney of Foundations Family Law and Mediation Center based in Worcester, Massachusetts. And our philosophy is we try to resolve family law conflicts as painlessly and peacefully as possible. I very much believe that education is empowerment, especially when it comes to the divorce process. You're going to hear from all of these wonderful professionals tonight, and they're going to give you information and help clear the fog to help you make informed decisions moving forward and feel less stuck. And that's why I'm so happy to be a part of Vesta. I've been with them for about 2 years now because they offer these wonderful educational webinars. And then also they have that complimentary concierge service we hope you take advantage of. So with that, I will turn it over to Lisa.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Hub. I'm a certified divorce coach, narcissistic abuse recovery coach, grief coach, and somatic coach. And I am a survivor of a narcissistic abuse and coercive control relationship. I went through my own high complex and high conflict divorce and rebuilt my life after the profound loss of losing my son. And I now work at the intersection of emotional regulation, nervous system regulation, and divorce strategy to help clients who are going through situations much like I did years ago. And really love to focus in the beginning on nervous system regulation because when our nervous system is overwhelmed, no matter, even if we have the absolute best support and best legal advice, we can't access it. We can't benefit from it in the right way and in an effective way. And my role is to really just help people slow down, get grounded, make clear decisions, and then start to really look at their divorce and their future from a place of clarity other than from a place of fear.
Thank you, Lisa. We'll pass it over to Marty.
Hi, everyone. So nice to be with you tonight. My name is Marty Chadwick Balcom. I am an attorney. I've been an attorney for 27 years, and I am the founder of the Integrative Divorce Mediation. I focus exclusively on divorce mediation now. After many years of litigation and going through my own divorce 18 years ago, I realized that there's a different way to do this. And so what I offer is the integrative piece of the integrative divorce mediation is bringing in what Lisa was talking about, nervous system regulation, really understanding that this is one of the most difficult times that many people go through as an adult. And that if we can do so with a regulated nervous system, it can make all the difference. We're making informed decisions and entering into agreements that can last. And my goal is to help folks find lasting agreements and and it's affordable. Litigation can be a very expensive proposition. I started my career in the world of domestic violence, so spent many years in domestic violence divorce litigation. And again, it took a toll on my own nervous system, but have a lot of experience working with those types of relationships. And while a lot of folks think that mediation might be an easy way out or that everybody has to get along, it doesn't. It's an opportunity for a lot of people to be able to take control and stay in control in how they want to divorce. And I look forward to helping people regulate and do that and hold space for them in the process.
Thank you, Marty. And with that, we'll turn it over to Maggie.
Thanks, Julie. Hi, everybody. I'm Maggie Eck. I'm a certified divorce lending professional and a mortgage loan officer, and very passionate about helping people through the divorcing process really figure out what their numbers are in terms of financing for their home, which is very important. That's one of the big topics we have tonight. But I'm a banker at heart, banker for 20 years, mortgage lending since 2018, and just very passionate about finding the right path for you because there's lots of ways to go about this. Some of those we're going to talk about tonight. So I'm here for you. I will put in the chat my contact information. Happy to do a 30-minute consult with you anytime. Just really here to talk things through and come up with the best path.
Thank you, Maggie. And last but not least, we have Tom.
Hey everyone, Tom Kilgallen. I'm a certified financial planner. I'm a certified divorce financial analyst. I'd been a certified financial planner for about 13 years and then went through my own separation and realized despite all my financial knowledge and 2 years in the finance industry, I had no clue how assets get divided or divvied up or figured out during divorce. Started study for my CDFA and then wrote a book called The Divorce Financial Handbook, which I have out on Amazon. I'm work with people during divorce as doing solo representation, representing individuals. I also work as a financial neutral in mediation settings, and I also do 30-minute free consultations. And I'll be putting my contact details. You can book time with me. I'll put that in the chat later. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And so now we're going to move into the more formal part of our presentation, and we are going to start off with Lisa, our divorce coach. Take it away, Lisa.
Thank you for being here. We know how hard it is to just get here and press play. You're overwhelmed, you're tired. If you are in our part of the world, it is so stinking cold outside. So thank you for showing up, pressing play, and being here and showing up for yourself. I often like to start our time together with a little grounding time, a little meditative space, a little quiet space for you guys to become present after your long, crazy, hectic day. I'm going to invite you all to close your eyes. And you don't have to close your eyes, but if you want to, I want to let you know and remind you we cannot see you. Nobody on the screen can see you. So close your eyes. You can even lie down, let yourself get really comfortable, and just start to take some really deep inhales and really deep exhales. Giving yourself some time and some space to take some really grounding breath. Filling your lungs up all the way, and then just releasing the breath all the way out. Just staying with those breaths for a moment or two. And now while you're breathing, let's let your feet get really heavy and grounded and connected into the floor. Maybe even just noticing you have feet. Letting your breath get a little deeper and a little deeper. Letting your body get a little more grounded and a little heavier into the chair wherever you're seated. And then maybe noticing if you hear any sounds around you other than my voice. Maybe it's a sound outside your home. Maybe it's your kids in the other room. Just taking notice of whatever you hear. Maybe taking a little notice of the temperature in your room. Is it warm? Is it cold? Is it perfect? And just allowing yourself to take a moment to be in this present moment. Now we're just going to change your breath up a little bit. And we're going to begin to inhale for a count of 5. Hold for a count of 2 if that feels okay. And exhale for a count of 8. And then just continue for a moment at your own pace with these 5 to 8 breaths. And what these breaths are doing is just sending a signal to your nervous system that you're okay and that you're safe right now. So letting that breath just flow for another minute in those 5 to 8 breaths. And as you're flowing in this 5 to 8 breath, maybe just thinking about a time or place in your life where you felt really safe. really grounded, really cozy, really happy. And as we're thinking about this time or place, just noticing where in your body you're feeling sensations and what those sensations feel like. And just letting that safe, grounded feeling really connect into you and into your body now. Sitting with that for a moment, staying with that, noticing where you feel it, how you feel it. And now maybe letting your breath go back to a bit more of a normal pace, whatever feels normal and natural for you. Maybe wiggling your hands, wiggling your feet, and letting yourselves wake up just for a minute. Coming back to the room, opening your eyes, giving yourself a minute about the finances and the emotional impact of the finances in the home in divorce. These are often the most stuck, the most spirally, and the most overwhelmed. And it's not because we're bad with money or bad at making decisions. It's because these are topics that don't just hit us logistically. They hit us at a deep core level. They hit our sense of safety, our sense of loss, and even our sense of survival. Money decisions and housing decisions, they don't just live on spreadsheets. They don't just live in our bank accounts. They really live in all of our nervous systems. And for many people, especially the home, I'm going to talk a lot about the home. Especially for a lot of people, the home represents safety. It represents survival and continuity of your place that you're in with your family and your relationship. So often we're talking about selling the home, keeping the home, or maybe our soon to be ex-partner buying us out of the home. We're not talking really about real estate. We're talking about grief, the grief and loss of fear and loss of control. And whether you are the one that initiated the divorce or not, there's always a lot of grief that comes up around divorce. It plays a huge role here. And even when people aren't understanding that it's grief or sensing that it's grief, is very often at play. And it is okay. So when you start to grieve the marriage and the family structure, maybe the future that you had planned to have, and even your identity, you've been leaving a marriage. What happens, what that grief does is it wants to hold on. It wants to hold on to something that feels familiar. And it tends to go bring our nervous system into our free state. And that free state is what helps us hang on and grip to that familiarity. I hear a lot of parents say to me, I had to keep the house. I had to keep the house for the kids. I had to keep everything the same for the kids. I need to make sure that isn't changing because everything in their life is changing. And that may be true. And it may not be true. So I like to encourage people, okay, I understand what you're saying. We all want to protect our children. But let's dig a little deeper. Let's look underneath this rock and see if what else this could mean. Because sometimes keeping the house is the best decision. And I'm not here to tell you whether it is or it isn't. But I often like to help my clients unpack it and try to figure it out. So let's say you want to keep the house for your kids, but maybe keeping the house and buying your soon-to-be ex out of the house means you're going to have to work longer hours. You're going to maybe have to have another job. You're going to have to be putting more time and energy into your career just to keep you and your family afloat financially and be able to afford the house. And that comes with so much emotional and financial stress. Or maybe it means you're going to have to spend all of your free time maintaining the house, shoveling the dang snow, doing the yard work, making sure you're getting everything updated and maintained. Figuring out how you're going to pay for something if something breaks in a hole. And this isn't always the best thing for your kids. Because if your children are going to benefit more from you being happy and emotionally regulated, they don't benefit necessarily from the square footage of the house. They benefit from you being present, happy, and grounded. So I like to help my clients start to think about, okay, do you want to keep this home? Is it an emotional choice or a regulated or logistical choice? And what I often see, when it's an emotional choice, it feels really urgent. My clients talk really fast. They're saying to me, I can't let the house go. The kids need to stay in their home. They need to stay in their bedroom. I don't want to pack up all this crap and leave. If my ex stays in the house or we sell the house, the kids aren't going to want to come and stay with me. They're going to prefer to be with him. And they're talking really fast and they're really animated and they're really anxious and it seems very urgent and it seems like it's a huge rush. When we're coming for a regulated decision, what I notice is their breath slows down, their mind slows down, their body slows down, and they're feeling a little steadier around the decision. They're looking, yes, at the spreadsheet, at the finances, and what feels good and right for them and their family. They're researching other options and other housing options. And that brings me into the next thing I like to do with clients. Bring in some somatic work, bring in some visualization, and bring the nervous system in. I find it's really helpful if we look at both sides. Okay, so I have my clients say, let's picture you, maybe with your eyes closed if that's helpful, living in a home you're living in now. Picture yourself there, see what it feels like, notice what it feels like to your body. And now let's start to think about you in the home alone with your kids. What is your financial situation like? What is your day-to-day life like and your schedule with the kids? How does this feel? How does this feel like it's working now? And let's think about how this would work also a couple years from now. Does this work? Does this feel like it works? Does it feel chaotic? What does it feel like to be in the same space you lived in with your soon-to-be ex? What is it going to feel like if maybe they still think they have a little ownership of the house and they try to come and go as they please? And just sitting in that space and noticing it. And sometimes it feels great. It feels comforting. It feels doable. And it feels like the best choice. And then I also like to encourage my clients, okay, let's picture you in a brand new space. Maybe it's a condo where you're already doing shoveling or yard work. Or maybe it's your dream house. Or maybe it's decorated however you want. And just picture yourself there and notice what that feels like. Does it feel scary? Does it feel free? Does it feel more financially doable? Does it feel like you have the capacity to maintain that and the time to maintain that? So just noticing how that lands in your body, how that feels in your body. Does it feel calm? Does it feel a little anxious? Do your nervous system feel settled? Does it feel like it's flying into fight, flight, or freeze? And that'll give us a lot of information to begin to work with. We just want to make sure we're not making your financial decisions from fear or from survival mode or from a place of grief. And we're really looking at strategy and long-term planning. What's not just going to work for you and your family now, but what's going to work for you 2 years from now, in 5 years from now. So deciding first, we regulate and then we decide. Honestly, one of the best ways, other than the somatic practices and tools, to come into this with a regulated mindset and with a regulated decision is to use the right professionals. Because in order to make the best decision, we also need to have all the facts and all the figures and come from a place of knowledge and understanding, because it's also going to land really well in our nervous system. And that is why we are all here tonight from all different aspects of divorce and all different divorce professionals to help you make all of these decisions or help you get the information you need to feel like you can make them from a grounded place and a place of clarity. And so from now, I will turn it over to our next person.
Thank you, Lisa. I love hearing you talk. It automatically just puts me in a more peaceful state. Marty and I are going to tag team this next segment together. Just a little bit of a disclaimer before we begin. Divorce law is state specific. And so we are the Central Massachusetts Hub, and Marty and I are licensed attorneys in Massachusetts. So we're going to be talking at high level about Massachusetts laws. If you are from another state, then we would urge you to connect with somebody who is licensed in your jurisdiction. Okay, now we got that out of the way, we can dig into the nitty-gritty. So we're going to talk about how do we get to a place that we can have an agreement about what we're going to do with the marital home and how we're going to divide retirement assets. From speaking from a high level place at the starting line, there are two main categories of different processes you can pursue when you're getting divorced. I'm going to talk more about the traditional process, and then Marty's going to talk about a more constructive process. So the traditional process is probably what you think about when you think about divorce. It involves court and attorney advocacy. It's a conflict-based process, and it moves forward primarily in the context of court dates and hearings where you're seeing the judge and your attorney is making arguments on your behalf. Although almost all cases eventually do settle, settlement negotiations, when you're in the courthouse, they can feel like they're occurring under a lot of stress. And sometimes we're literally hammering out details in the courthouse lobby or on the courthouse steps. And sometimes clients in the traditional process feel like they are being dragged through the process instead of controlling what happens. And these are some of the horror stories that you might hear from friends or families or even celebrities who get divorced. And so this may all sound like doom and gloom, but however, sometimes litigation is necessary if emergency temporary orders are needed, or if there's domestic violence, or if you just have a completely unreasonable opposing party who's willing to communicate or compromise. You can't negotiate with the terrorists. That's what the court system is there for. And then switching quickly to the constructive process that Marty's going to talk mostly about. These are more client-centered and settlement-oriented. The main ones are represented negotiation, mediation, and collaborative law. With represented negotiation, this is a settlement-based process, and each spouse can hire their own attorney, and the attorneys communicate directly with each other. We exchange financial information, and we negotiate to try to come up with a full agreement. The court often doesn't even know that we're doing this all behind the scenes. A divorce may not even be filed yet, and they won't know until we file your separation agreement, which is your divorce contract, and we'll be talking about that more tonight. But both sides are entitled to ask for information so that they have full transparency into finances that they need to make an educated decision in this process. All right, Marty, you want to talk about mediation?
Yeah, thanks, Julie. So mediation it's Julie was saying it's more of a constructive process where we're really focusing on the parties together. And as the spouses are going to work together with an impartial professional, a neutral person who's the mediator. Sometimes they're an attorney, sometimes they're not. It just depends. In my case, I am an attorney. And our job is to help you understand the issues that you must decide. We're going to have a facilitated conversation about those issues so that you can come to agreements together to make decisions around how you want to move forward. Mediators in Massachusetts, we are specifically trained in conflict resolution and the family dynamics. We have training in finance and the legal issues surrounding divorce. So, an important note here, as a mediator, we cannot provide legal advice. So we do recommend that you consult with an attorney at least before you sign your agreement. And that is the case even if your mediator is an attorney. We are not your attorney, so we cannot provide you that independent legal advice. So one of the other options is called collaborative law. And so that's collaborative with a capital C. It's a branded system, which is, again, the capital C versus small c collaborative, where you can resolve legal disputes out of court. So in the collaborative law process, each side will have an attorney, and negotiations are facilitated by a neutral professional, often called the collaborative law coach. Sometimes the financial neutrals will be part of it, or other outside professionals that are supporting the team. So a key feature of the collaborative law process is that the entire group signs a contract, and the attorneys and the coach agree up front that if the case doesn't get settled, then there's no representation or no more. All the work that's been done in the collaborative process is done. You can't use it, and the attorneys will not be on your case if it goes to litigation. So there's a big incentive to keep people at the table and to work towards an actual settlement. So as Jolie mentioned, in order to get divorced in Massachusetts, if you're doing any kind of settlement, you have to come up with what we call the contract or the separation agreement. If you cannot come up with that, then you have to ask the judge to decide, and that's usually done through a trial. So you're going to have one of the two agreements. Again, we call it a separation agreement in Massachusetts. There's no such thing as legal separation. It is the name of the agreement, it's your contract. Three main areas that we cover in your separation agreement under the divorce law are going to be the financial support, asset and debt division, and anything regarding your children, regarding parenting, time, custody, or logistics of children under 18. So that's a pretty high level view. I'm going to turn it back over to Jolie.
Thank you, Marty. Asset division, we're going to dive into a little deeper because tonight's topic is about what to do with the marital home and retirement accounts, which are often your two biggest assets to divide in a divorce. In Massachusetts, asset division is based on the concept of equitable division. What this means is that in a divorce, every asset that each spouse owns is considered for division. It doesn't matter whose name is titled on it. It doesn't matter if it was premarital. We take all of the property owned by either or both of the spouses and put it into one big marital pot. And that is what we have to decide how it's going to be divided in the divorce. An important consideration is how assets are divided equitably is the length of the marriage. In a long-term marriage, which, is about 15 years or more, the general guideline is that everything will probably be divided about 50-50. There is some discretion and compelling circumstances for this, but in a shorter-term marriage, which is about 5 years or less, often each person will keep the property they brought into the marriage. Whatever was acquired during the marriage, the joint property will be divided equally. But this is also subject to discretion as well. And if you're in that midterm marriage range, then it's even more important to look at, there's a long list of factors in our statute that the judge has to consider when dividing assets. But just one important thing to note is that equitable division does not just mean equal, 50-50. It means fair based off of a variety of factors. But the length of the marriage I like to highlight because that's one of the most important ones that the judge looks at when they're making their decisions. All right, Marty, you want to talk about quadros with retirement accounts?
Sure. Yeah. So many of you may have heard of this term, quadro, QDRO, which stands for a qualified domestic relations order. So when you have retirement assets, they're treated differently. They're pre-tax dollars, and there's a whole bunch that Tom can talk more about regarding the magic of retirement funds. But in order to split them, they can't just be split with, I'm going to take this, you're going to take that. There is laws and specific things that have to be done. So that you need to have a quadro prepared. And it's prepared not by your attorney, usually by a specialist after the agreement, the separation agreement or your contract has been approved by court. So this allows the funds that are held in the retirement account to be transferred to the other party without the typical taxes and penalties that would happen when you do it, because there's exceptions when you transfer things subject to a divorce. So once the quadros have been prepared, they then need to be submitted to the court with a motion to enter them. All of this is done after the divorce has been finalized. So if that's part of the asset division, there's a little bit of work left to do. And when you work with an attorney or with a mediator, whoever your team is, they will help you and guide you through that process.
Great. And then we're just going to finish up briefly about talking about housing while your divorce case is pending. This can be a contested issue, and it comes up like at the very beginning when you are considering to get divorced. So there's different arrangements that we typically see for how people deal with housing while they're at the beginning of the divorce process. Some people and parties do choose to continue to live together when they are negotiating their divorce or it's making their way through the court. This is typically to conserve financial resources, as housing is very expensive right now, and to maintain stability for the children. I've even seen some parties who if they have a large enough home, we've come up with agreements that someone's going to take this bedroom, someone's going to take this bedroom, and we divide up the physical space in the house. I've seen that happen. Another option that some people choose to use is called a nesting arrangement. And this is where the children stay in the marital home and the parents rotate in and out of the house when they have their parenting time. So where does the other parent go if it's not your time in the marital home? Things that I have seen are people stay with family or friends. Sometimes the parties will rent an apartment and they'll go in and out of that when they're not at the marital home. So there's a couple of different ways that you can make it work. But the main goal here is keeping the stability of the children so they're not the ones that are moving back and forth. There are cases where the conflict may be too high in the home and destabilizing for children, and it could be possible to seek, it's called a motion to vacate. This is where we're asking the court to enter an order to vacate, which is good for 90 days, and it gets one party out of the home. There's another option called, if you could file a motion to seek sole use and occupancy of the marital home. So that's something else you may want to look into. And in more abusive situations, a party could also seek to have a restraining order granted, which if approved, one party would not be able to reside at the marital home for a specific period of time. In other cases, one party may choose to move out of the marital home. However, I just will add a quick note of caution here. If you do have children, I would urge that you have an agreed upon parenting schedule in place before you just move, because then you'd probably be subject to your spouse and their willingness to allow you to see the kids. So to avoid any issues there, you just want to make sure you have an agreement on parenting time.
Great. So we hope that this high-level overview was helpful to you. And so we are available for consultations. We're going to be answering questions in the chat. And thanks for letting us share a little bit. And we look forward to connecting with you all.
Thank you, Marty. And with that, we'll bring on Tom and Maggie.
Hey everyone, how's it going? Great to collaborate with Maggie as always. Maggie and I are always going back and forth brainstorming on clients. What can they afford? Can they what are their housing options? How does it fit with their overall plan? Maggie, did you want to start and just describe maybe what you typically face when someone comes to you initially?
Yeah, absolutely. The home and retirement, those are two of the hottest topics of and just really figuring this whole thing out financially and stability. I love what all of our partners have shared tonight. And I don't usually share slides or anything, but I do want to see, can I share? Yeah, I do just want to share this because can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So this little chart here, it just is so helpful to me, at least. The home really overlaps in all of these categories. So working with the family law, the financial piece, the mortgage planning, but it's just like a lot of times the center of everything. But you're like, where do I start in all of this? And all of us as a team, and how Marty and Lisa had talked about getting those right professionals in place, it's really whoever you start with will know to send you to the next person. But just the overlap there is I just wanted to share that. And so tonight, our goal is really just to help you understand some options, what's coming to home and retirement. When people meet with me, I always let them know that the first thing we want to do is the first question is, should I stay or should I go? Or can I stay? Or do I have to buy? Or can I buy my ex out of the share of the home? And all those things. When we meet, we really just look at, okay, what's the ownership situation? We'll go over income. We'll talk about your debt situation. And then we'll talk about different options for financing. Julie mentioned the word equitable, right? And you'll hear that in Massachusetts, that's equitable. What does that mean? It means fair, basically. So it's some people go, oh, I automatically have to give him or her half of the equity in the house. But then you'll hear the word equity. It's like equitable equity, right? So I just want to touch on that a little bit. That equitable division is just what everyone would agree is a fair division, or if it had to go to the judge, would determine what that equitable division would be. But the equity in your home would be, so the value of your house minus what you owe on the current mortgage, right? That essentially is the equity in the home. And it's sometimes just split down the middle, and that's the decision. Other times, and if you're in a mediation situation and you're all talking and someone brought more money to the table at the beginning and everyone's just in agreement that maybe they'll get a third of it instead, or maybe the judge determines that, right? So whatever the amount is decided, then we take that, what we call an equity buyout. Let's say your equity in a home is $500,000 and everyone's in agreement that it's going to be split in half and you want to stay in the home. Now you have to figure out, how am I going to come up with $250,000 to buy out my ex, right? And so when we meet, we'll go over your options. So we're looking at your income, we're looking at your debt, and then we're looking at your options. And the most common ways of doing an equity buyout and keeping the home would be to refinance the home. But there's a lot of times there's two types of refinances, and people will ask me about what's the difference between a cash out refinance versus a rate and term refinance. And I wanted to explain tonight. So typically the biggest difference between those two in terms of why does it matter to your pocketbook is there's oftentimes a difference in rate, right? The rate that you might get for those. So we try to make it a rate and term. What that means is if you're not going through a divorce and you're just doing a refinance, you're refinancing just what you owe and you're not taking any additional equity, so pay off credit cards or something. But if someone is taking additional funds, they're going to have to take a cash out refinance and their rate's going to be just slightly higher, right? In the divorce process, if you're taking just the amount you need to do the equity buyout, and that's on your separation agreement as the amount, we can consider that a rate and term refinance and give you that preferred pricing versus a cash out. If you do need to take additional funds above what you have to pay for the equity buyout to maybe pay off like a car to qualify or something, then it would fall into cash out and you have to take that little higher rate. But those are the difference. So if you see things out there, cash out refi versus rate and term. Another way to tap into your equity for an equity buyout would be using a home equity line of credit. And that would just be, so that's the case if I get a question a lot, like I'm not on the mortgage, but I am on the deed and I want to buy my ex out. If he or she is the one on the mortgage, right? You're going to have to take a new mortgage, pay that mortgage off and take extra to pay the equity buyout. Vice versa, sometimes both people are on the mortgage and one wants to leave. There are times when you can get the lender to do what's called an assumable mortgage. I get that question a lot. Can I keep my 2.5% rates that I got back in 2020 and just do a home equity line and buy out my ex? And sometimes you can. To be honest, it all goes back to when you first got the mortgage. At the time when you signed, it's actually right there, one of a check mark of if it's going to be an assumable allowed or not. And so we would first get that paperwork and look at it. There are times when we've been able to convince lenders in the case of divorce to still allow an assumable. And what that means is even though you're both on it, one party's coming off the loan, but you're not actually refinancing. You're keeping the current terms of the loan. So that current rate, current payment, but the one person is just coming off. You still have to qualify though. So you have to be able to qualify for that payment with your current income yourself. So equity buyouts are either refis, home equity loans, or doing an assumable mortgage, a combination of all these things. Or instead of giving those funds, they offset it sometimes. This is where I'll bring Tom in and I can go on my other things I wanted to mention, Tom. But if you could weigh in on, sometimes I turn to Tom and I say, hey, they can't really afford or it doesn't make sense to have a higher mortgage because Lisa was saying you're going to have to be taking a second job and waiting tables. But there is a lot of retirement over here. So then I go to Tom and say, can we run some numbers on offsetting it with maybe on the Quadro?
Yep. Yeah, so when people come to me, they want to know, are they going to be okay? And I try and make sure they focus on the fact that this is not just a transaction going through divorce. This is the rest of your life kind of plan. So we want to look at the big picture. What does that look like? I try and put the numbers down on paper. A lot of it is emotion in people's heads. I'm not going to tell them you've got to go one direction or the next. I just say, let's look at the options and you tell me what feels right for you. So we start looking at all the goals. So I come from a planning background, so I'm always looking at the big picture. What do you have to do in the future in terms of college for the kids, for example? What age do you want to retire? Do you love your job? Do you hate it? Are you okay with taking on more income, more work? Once we put everything down together, we look at the assets. What are they worth to you? So 100,000 sitting in cash is not going to be the same as 100,000 sitting in a 401k. They're taxed differently. The pension, what is that worth? People sometimes have no idea what their spouse's pension is worth. I'm not going to give you an exact number, but I can give you a ballpark, and that's what that's worth. So when we start looking at all the future cash flows, then we're able to figure out, are you going to run into a liquidity issue? You might even run out of money. You might have plenty of assets, but liquidity dries up. So you don't want to put yourself in a corner. So we're strategizing around that. And I'm looking at the risks as well. Okay, what if perhaps the paying spouse that's paying alimony or child support, what if they die? How do we protect that stream of income? Looking at everything there, but a lot of times when it comes to how do we do the housing and the payout of the housing asset, that's when I need to pull Maggie in to look at the options. And we've worked on cases where, one we worked on recently where the person was able to buy out their spouse, but it was only good to keep that house till her kids went to college because it would become too expensive over the long term. So we're looking at as well, what's the maintenance cost of those houses? How does that compare to renting in your local town? What does that look like? We're just trying to step back, take the emotions out, put it down on paper, but then ultimately it's going to be the person that decides the direction they want to go. We're just putting all the information in front of them, and we're just taking the emotions out, and they can come up with a path that's sustainable longer term. Again, not just a transaction, but something that's you're not going to run into trouble 5 years from now. You may win the battle, get a great deal in the divorce, but that doesn't mean you won the war and you have a sustainable plan. We need you set up for life, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. I love that you do that. And I use that a lot when I'm talking with clients too, that when I have them recommend they meet with Tom or just a financial advisor in general, but of course, love working with Tom, is that sustainability piece and just being realistic, because sometimes it makes more sense to sell and buy or let your spouse, maybe they want to stay in the home. And we run those numbers too. If they want to stay in the home, what does it look like for you if you're walking away with some proceeds from receiving an equity buyout and then purchasing a new home? And that's very important to run those numbers as well. And so when we're meeting, my job is to help all the numbers for all those scenarios, right? Buying out with the different scenarios, using equity or maybe foregoing some of your retirement instead, and having all the scenarios in black and white with numbers, and then backed up by something like Tom looking at your sustainable plan, then you can go into those emotional decisions and be at the negotiating table, whether it's through mediation, like with Marty, or you're going through the collaborative law or litigation with Jolie and her team, and really feel confident about what you're talking about. Because sometimes you go to the table too early and you haven't run your numbers and you just feel overwhelmed. It's like Lisa said, the reason why she starts our calls is like starting there and regulating yourself. And you just getting all this information helps you be able to really look at it calmly and not be that, what did Lisa call it? The high energy, fast talking decision making. Instead, you're really looking at numbers and making decisions based on your long-term success, like Tom said. And then being able to make those emotional decisions. On the purchase, too, I find sometimes starting over, having a new space makes sense. I hear this from my partners and my clients that, you know what, actually it ended up being a better thing selling the marital home and buying my own space. Lisa was talking about picturing yourself in your space, even if it's just emotionally, but also financially. Tom mentioned I met with a client today who I referred over to Tom, we were talking about the maintenance on the house. It's a big house that she has, and it would be a lot for her to handle on her own. So we were talking about the cost of all that as well.
Yeah, I think it's like fresh energy too, right? Sometimes a lot of good memories, but also you want to clean out some of that energy. A new space can help with that. And like you said, think of the maintenance. Do you want to be like I was early last week on a roof, not on the roof, but close to it? Europe than I would like, trying to deal with ice dams. Do you want to deal with that? And if you don't, what will it cost to hire someone to do all that? Cleaning off the roof when we have massive snowstorms, etc. Take your time to think about what that looks like and how that'll feel like. And doing all that, will that take time away from your kids as well too?
Yeah.
And we'll figure out if you got the money to pay for all that. Man. That's our job.
Well, that's the other piece is the income. I know we both get the question a lot of, can I afford that? And on paper too, when I'm doing these calculations for you from a loan officer perspective and what an underwriter would approve. Oh, at this point, on most of our underwriting wants us to fit your debt to income. So all of your liabilities. So that's the home principal, interest, taxes, insurance on the home, maybe some private mortgage insurance, PMI if you have it. If you have an HOA fee, and then any of your other monthly liabilities that show up on credit, like student loans, auto loans, credit card minimums. So all of that needs to fit inside of somewhere between 45 and 50% of your income, depending on which program we're using. And so we could do all these calculations and I could say, oh yeah, you would approve for that. And then I tell you what the monthly payment might be. And you say, oh, that doesn't feel good. And then I can't contribute to my retirement or won't be able to afford dance class for my daughter or whatever things you enjoy, yoga, whatever it is. And so that's another way that Tom and I really help you crunch those numbers to set some realistic expectations on what that would mean. So then if I crunch the numbers with you on, okay, if you bought a smaller home or a different home, and this is what that would look like. And you can start really visualizing that along with those other things like Lisa had mentioned. But for income, sometimes you have one spouse that maybe hasn't been working. Maybe they've been in the home taking care of the kids or just the home in general, or they've just reduced their hours. And there's a concern that they might not qualify. I also a lot of times have clients who are small business owners. And on a tax return with small business owners, like all of us, we try to pay as little taxes as possible. But you're writing off a lot on your taxes. That's another part of my role is there's so many different mortgage programs out there, and a lot of them allow the banks will be very strict, but then we have other lending options. I'm here to be creative with you. And the fact that I know all of these options, you might feel like, oh, there's no way I can get approved for a loan, but there might be a way to be creative. Or if we need that maybe alimony or child support income, the future child support and alimony income to qualify, we can calculate that and come up with a plan. And then you can bring that to the negotiating table that, hey, my mortgage loan officer told me that in 6 months, if you're receiving the child support or alimony for 6 months, then we can use it. But it could start even immediately as long as it's the same. So if you're working with Marty and it's a very agreeable situation and everyone comes up with, yes, she's going to pay him this amount of child support, whatever it is. And as long as that amount is consistent for 6 months, then we could use that in 6 months. So there's little tricks like that and little planning. So if we're talking ahead of the separation agreement, we can be part of making that plan be when you sign on the dotted line, we want you to be successful with it. I don't want you to come to me after you've signed a separation agreement and you've all agreed that you'll buy out your ex in 6 months, but then no one took the time to run credit and actually do calculations. And I say, oh gosh, that doesn't work. And same thing with Tom. He's big success, long-term success.
Yeah, I can't underscore that enough. Like, talk to your lending professional and your CDFA ahead of time. Like you said, you don't want to sign that agreement and then find out it's not executable. Like, you can't get that refinance or you can't get insurance on your spouse or yourself like you agreed to in the divorce decree. And it's just, now you've got a problem. Start building your team early. Don't take it all on yourself. It's ridiculous, all the things you got to think of. We didn't even talk about Social Security, healthcare, all of that. Like, just break it down and build your team to help you get through that. It's way too much for just one person to take on. The earlier you start building that team, the better. And save yourself some legwork and some fees, hopefully, instead of bouncing question last minute. We can save you some legwork and hopefully some fees by talking to us early on.
Yep. Yeah. And the things I want to talk about too, sometimes people will create solutions or things that they think might be helpful. Like you might think, oh, you know what? I do want to probably sell this house. So I'm going to go. Somebody was talking to me the other day. They're like, yeah, but Maggie, all the tile backsplash in my kitchen is cracked. So before I do anything, I need to fix that. So the other thing of talking with your team is before you really do anything, from fixing something in the house to someone the other day just went and took the joint savings account and paid off all of their debts, right? And you just want to pause because you want to talk with your professionals, because actually it would have been more beneficial if, in that debt example, if she had left the cash there, because it would have been more beneficial for her to pay off one of the cars because they're going to transfer titles, right? And now that cash has already been spent to pay off a debt. And so it's just like waiting, pausing, taking that deep breath, regulating yourself. Lisa says Marty does a lot of that work as well, regulation, and really just getting the right advice and coming up with a plan and then communicating it. But then obviously, if you are in a situation like Julie mentioned, where there's abuse involved or there's urgent situations, obviously there's some differences there where you're acting fast and you need that different advice. We're here for you guys at whatever stage you're at.
I didn't see any questions coming in. Are they going to come in the chat?
We've had some in the Q&A as you guys have been talking, but we
Okay.
also, I want to invite the rest of our professionals back because we have some questions that were submitted ahead of time that we can go through. And everyone who's here, please continue to add to the Q&A and we can answer those live. So a couple of questions that we had ahead of time. This one I think is for you, Maggie. How to qualify for a home mortgage with just one salary?
Yeah, so one salary, so that's the example of if we might need to use a different kind of program. Maybe like FHA, for example, Federal Housing Association, it's a government loan. It lets you go a little higher on that debt to income ratio I talked about. Or maybe just we've got, sometimes you have someone who's a 1099 employee. We've got some different programs for that. We can be creative. If it doesn't work and then you have family members, though, sometimes a co-signer will come on. I have a client right now whose mother is willing, she's going to come on the loan with her to help her buy out the house. And so that's not always the case. I don't have someone who would jump on a loan with me, but sometimes that helps too. Yeah.
And then there's some questions about pensions, Tom. One question is a little bit lengthy, but it's asking if a quadro is needed to be able to divide a pension.
Yeah, you need a quadro for that. I can give you a rough estimate of what that pension is worth. So you'd be amazed. Some people have no idea what it's worth, or you'll be amazed that one spouse, you've probably seen this, Joey, tries to be like, yeah, my pension's not worth much. And you look at it and it could be worth like $500,000. You could then got to figure out, okay, how much of that pension was accrued during the period of the marriage? What's the coverture factor it's called? Then you've got to look at, it's quite a detailed calculation. There's life expectancy that pulls into it, discounted cash flows, different pensions have different rules and how they allow you to divide those. So you want to check in on that as well. That's something that would be typically quarterbacked by the attorney and working with myself as well to look at that pension. And then we can use services like PASA to do a formal valuation. I think they charge about $800 of the pension. But the pension is a real marital asset. It can be one of the biggest, if not the biggest asset that gets divided. So take that valuation seriously, and I'm happy to talk to you about that and at least get you a ballpark before you get a formal valuation done.
Great. We have some more coming in the Q&A. Alimony in long-term marriage. Payee is retired, but not drawing yet. How does this work in mediation? He is refusing support and I don't want to go to court. Payee is retired, but not drawing yet. I wonder if that's supposed to be payor.
I would assume maybe it's the payor.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess we could talk about what we didn't talk about alimony, I don't think. So in alimony, the three factors that we look at are length of the marriage. So it sounds like this is a long-term marriage, the need of the person, the recipient, and the ability of the person, the payor, to pay. The other thing that is considered is usually alimony doesn't go beyond when it ends at the federal retirement age. So it's 67. So if the person is retired at 67, this may not be a situation for alimony or spousal support. So it depends situation. I think we would need a little bit more facts, but those are the general facts that we consider. And if they were in mediation, if you guys were in mediation, this is something we would be talking about and trying to figure out, what the goals are and the needs are. And if you're not divorced yet, there is some sort of retirement. That's still an asset that's going to be divided. Tom, like that's still their asset. I'm assuming there's more than just Social Security. Assuming there's more than just Social Security at this point, that would still be considered as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've also seen in some situations if the payor is beyond retirement age, so there can't be an alimony order, that maybe if the person who would be receiving alimony might get a little bit more of the division of the marital estate to offset for that. So there's some other avenues that we could consider too.
Yeah, you should. Yeah, Social Security strategy it's its own plan as well too. Maybe that person can be convinced that they should be drawing Social Security or not, but that retirement age is going to be key. But Social Security is an asset that can be factored into to marital division, and sometimes people will weigh that out. But as you said, alimony after retirement age might not come into play.
Oh, this one is receiver is retired. There was a clarification. So the person
Oh,
receiving.
the recipient is retired. Okay.
So that could still be, depending on if the payor is retired or not. If they're not, it could still be, again, based on the need of the receiver. That's that need piece.
Yeah. And I think the court would, if you brought this issue to the court, if you had the ability to be receiving some kind of retirement income on your own or Social Security or what have you, and you're deciding not to, the court may say, why aren't you taking that? So they might impute that income to you if they were to do an alimony calculation. So that's something to consider as well.
Yeah, there was that famous case of someone was making multi-million in IT and just didn't want to pay a lot in alimony, so he decided he was going to become a mushroom farmer and make 10 grand a year, and court slapped that down pretty quick.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, there was another question that kind of goes along with that. It was about somebody who thought their spouse was like delaying bonuses and stuff to show that they were making a lower income. And a trick that I like to share is that if you ask for your spouse's Social Security statement, it would show like the past 20 years sometimes what their taxable income was. So if they're making $200,000 for the past decade and then all of a sudden they're making 70,000, there'd be a discrepancy there. And I think there would be an argument to be made that some income should be imputed.
Yeah.
All right. So it's another question. How do you decide where or which fund to draw funds from to pay the other party across a 403B, Roth IRA, regular IRA, and even a large HSA?
Yeah. So I could take that. Yeah. So there's different taxation levels. Typically, if you want to go lower tax, it's the brokerage account, and then you would move on to a Roth if it's been held for over 5 years. Then you get into ordinary income taxes, which is higher tax rate when you get into 403Bs, IRAs, and I think the HSAs as well. But we do want to think about not leaving you with too much assets that you can't touch till you're 59 and a half, like those 401ks, IRAs, etc. You don't want to be like cash poor, like brokerage account, like non-taxable accounts poor, and have everything in those, because if you want to take those out early before 59 and a half, you will get a 10% penalty unless it's done pursuant to divorce, which is a whole other thing. If you are going to get paid out of a 401k, IRA, etc., you want to take that money out and you want to do it right before you move it on to another account or roll it to an IRA to avoid that 10% penalty. You should strategize with someone on that. There's no quick answer on that. You want to make sure you do it tax efficiently, but you don't put yourself in a bind where everything's in taxable accounts that you're going to get penalized later if you need to touch them. Do a bit of strategy with a CDFA, I would recommend.
Does physical custody play into the equitable division, or is that a separate financial consideration? You want to take that one, Marty?
Sure. So it would depend, I guess. We're looking at, there's all sorts of factors that go into the equitable division and the needs of the children. And Jolie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that is certainly going to be a consideration. You're going to look at the parenting plan, but there's also child support that is going to be calculated based on the parenting plan. So depending on if it's 50-50 custody or 2/3 custody, if there's children with special needs, I sat in, the special needs. I'm like, there's a few exceptions, but generally speaking, not usually.
Yeah, that's my intuition is it is a factor, like the needs of the children is a factor for equitable distribution, but in how I've seen it play out in real life, the judges don't tend to put much stock into that factor because of the child support that the parent, the primary custodial parent will be receiving, unless there are significant special needs of a child. That is one place that I've seen that they might have the other parent get a little bit more of the pie just because to offset for that.
And that we didn't talk about child support here, but I think one thing just to mention is even if there's 50-50 custody, there still could be a child support order. In Massachusetts, if there is a disparity in with the incomes, a lot of people think if it's 50-50 custody, there'll be no child support. And that's not necessarily the case in Massachusetts. So it is considered even if you're doing shared custody.
All right, there's a question. I'm 61 and receive DDS, and spouse is still working. How would alimony be distributed after a 25-year marriage? I can take this one. I'll give it a shot. The court will still want to see if the payor has an ability to pay, if the recipient has a need. And one thing that the court looks at to determine need is the lifestyle that the parties enjoyed during the marriage. So if they're going to look and see what socioeconomic class were you in, and that is the lens that the court is looking at to see if alimony should be ordered. So we would need to look at both of the finances, see what the differential is between the two incomes, if the payor has ability to pay, if the recipient has a need. But a 25-year marriage, that is considered long-term in Massachusetts, so that if alimony was ordered, it could be general term alimony with an unlimited duration, which would end when the payor reaches that full retirement age that Marty was talking about. Okay. My spouse retired early and spent most of the annuity in less than 2 years. I want to keep my 401k and not split it, and he can keep the rest of the annuity, but my 401k is worth more now. Will that matter?
Yeah. Yeah, I think totally it could matter. Yeah, I mean, it was their marital assets and now there's an imbalance, but I think the caveat, right, would be what if he'd squandered? If he'd squandered on the mistress, you're right, then there's got to be a repercussion from the court in that regard. But
Yeah.
on the face of it, if he did not do that, and there's not a trade-off with another asset, there is an imbalance there that they may want to rectify. But also, the 401k you got it, maybe not all that 401k was accrued during the life of the marriage. Maybe I had someone come to me last week and they'd gotten a nasty letter. You might have seen this letter from another divorce professional saying, here's how we're going to divvy everything up, and the 401k is worth this and the house is that. Hold on a second. Most of that 401k was built up before you came into the marriage. So we caught that. So it depends here. Don't just look purely at the balance. Maybe not all of that is a marriage. And that's where we and myself and Marty will come in.
Yeah, I think the court would want to know, why did he retire early? Was that like a joint decision, or is that something he went off and did on his own? What were those funds spent on? Were the funds spent to support the household, or was there any dissipation of those funds that there might need to be an offset for you to keep more of your 401k? So I think it can matter. It's just very fact specific.
Yeah.
Oh, and there's been more information. He did squander the money on a girlfriend. So I think that would be very relevant. And you may have compelling arguments to have that split differently than is usually the case. All right, I'm just looking at some of the questions that were submitted in advance. Oh, I think there was a question about keeping a joint account open post-divorce. Marty, you might see this in your work, like some creative solutions for parties to keep open maybe an account for children's expenses, or if there's going to be a period of time where parties are going to keep the marital home. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think a lot of times it's mostly I've mostly seen it in mediation. There's a few cases that they decide, but it's a settlement. Usually it's not a court ordered thing. And I actually have a case right now that is post separation many years where they did keep it for the very purposes of child related expenses. And each person was supposed to deposit whatever, $200 a month in and then draw it out. I think it can be a good idea at times. My recommendation is that there's a clear understanding of how it's going to be used, who's going to be putting the money in, and then the accounting for how the money gets drawn out, right? Because you've got to have some parameters around that and what that looks like. So I I haven't seen it in as many recent cases, to be honest with you, because with Venmo and all of these other ways you can change money on apps, there's a lot of different ways to exchange money and do that versus the bank account. Whenever I work with folks, we just have to have a really clear conversation around what the expectations are, what the boundaries are, what the accounting is, so that we know and one person isn't just taking the money out to go spend it on whatever they want to spend it on, which happens. It happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Word of warning on joint credit. The credit card company doesn't care if your name is on it and you're joint on that. They can go after you for that. Pre, post divorce, during divorce, whenever.
The IRS as well.
Yep.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In some of the questions too, a repeat thing is during the divorce process, one spouse spending money a certain way, like I was talking about the credit card being paid off, just she made that decision. Marty and Julie, if you could weigh in a little bit, like somebody had asked if the person goes and rents an apartment, but it's an expensive apartment and now it's hard for them to cover all the bills and they're trying to get the house ready to sell, but she's spending the money in a way that wasn't agreed upon. I'm sure that comes up a lot for you guys. What do you have to say to that?
Yeah, this can come up a lot and it can get really messy really quickly. So usually we have to get in on a motion for temporary orders so that there's clear expectations about who's responsible to pay what moving forward. Because if not, then people can just be taking all these unilateral actions and then you're going to try to recoup some of that in the final division of the divorce. So that usually, like I said, is we'll have to go in on a motion for temporary orders. And if we can't come to an agreement on it, then that's something the judge would make decisions on. I also saw a question along the similar lines of a spouse incurring a lot of debt on credit cards post their separation, but while they're still divorcing. And I will say that generally, after you separate, if you're incurring credit card debt to pay for your own individual housing or for your attorney, usually that debt will stay with that spouse. That's usually what I typically see play out. I know it can be worrisome because it's still considered marital debt, but if the divorce is filed and you're clearly separated, usually those end up with the individual spouses, unless it's clearly for household expenses at the marital home.
Yeah. There's another question there, Julie, that kind of goes into that. The spouse moved out in July of 2023. I've paid all household bills since then. What will that be considered in the equity division of the house?
Yeah, I do see this. So if your spouse moved out and you've been paying the mortgage every month, I've seen it where that spouse will get a credit for the pay down of the mortgage principal for that period of time. So that's something that I would certainly at least argue and see what your judge's opinion on this is. If you've caught our drift throughout this whole conversation, a lot of this we're couching in it depends or this could be this way. And that's because family law is extremely discretionary. Our judges, they have some guidelines and parameters, but they really are free to make decisions based on their individual biases, which you can have a certain case with one set of facts and present it to two different judges and get two totally different outcomes. We can talk about what we've seen happen, but there's never any guarantees, unfortunately, in family law, and it's very fact specific.
Yeah. And just to go on that, I think that's another reason to really look at when the team that you're hiring, particularly around your attorneys or your mediator, knows the court or has a general sense of that court, because it does. We know the judges, we can't say what they're going to decide, but we generally have some experience within that. And again, everyone is a little bit different, and you can have the same facts, go to two different judges, get two totally different outcomes. Well, the same
Another
judge, two outcomes on two different days.
That too. They might be in a grumpy mood because they're ready for lunch and you're their last case and they just are ready to get off the bench. So it really is. But this, I think, goes back to what you were saying, Marty, in the beginning, that if you want to choose a process where you're more in control of your terms, mediation, that is, even though, you're going to have to compromise and you won't get everything you want because nobody ever does, at least you're choosing those terms and not having gambling on a judge. So it has a lot to say there.
Julie, I saw a question in the questions ahead of time that we had, that someone just basically saying, needing to know, should I refinance or should I use retirement funds for that equity buyout? And I think, even though we've talked about it in general, I just want to talk specific to that for a second. That when we do the numbers, we're looking at like the refinance, seeing if that's affordable, or using retirement funds. So what Tom was talking about is it's the 100,000 of from taking out of your equity, like a cash out refi or that rate and term refi, is not the same as 100,000 over here in retirement money. So we would help you calculate. Like I had a client the other day, we were calculating, okay, if he did 100,000 on an equity line and then foregoed a certain amount of retirement, you'd have to factor in taxes on that. So it's like adding in another 30%, or Tom does that calculations because he's so. Tom, can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, my software, we can put those two scenarios side by side and how that changes the probability of success of your plan. We put that in the software and you may see an incremental difference there. But another reason why it's important to chat to is some people, they have that conversation, but they're doing things like they've got a credit card where they're paying 20% and then coming to me saying, Tom, can you invest this? Or can you invest money for me? I want to build up savings. I'm like, that makes no sense because I'm not going to be 20% that you're paying in your credit card. So we always talk about the opportunity cost. Okay. So if you pay down something here or pay student loans off, sometimes you don't want to do that. They're only 2-3%. What's the opportunity that you're missing? You're missing an opportunity to get a better mortgage situation potentially, or the opportunity to make money on investments. So we're looking at the whole debt structure. People do things where they have a ton of money sitting in cash for the rainy day, and that could be better used paying off that credit card or somewhere else. So we want to look at everything holistically, and we can figure out whether refi versus investment the best way to go.
A question just came in. If your spouse is the primary card holder of all credit cards and you are an authorized user, are both parties responsible to pay the debt? And I would say, I mean, it depends. If the debt was accrued during the marriage and it was used on the family or household expenses, then you probably will have some responsibility to repay that debt. If it was incurred post the separation, then that amount will probably go with that individual person. But I will say I've even seen some extreme circumstances like where parties have just lived way beyond their means in a marriage. And sometimes a client or party will say, I didn't know that we were so much in debt, but they were enjoying all the benefits of that kind of elevated lifestyle. And the judge will say, you still went on that vacation, you still drove that kind of level of car. And even though you didn't maybe sign on the dotted line, you implied consent by enjoying that standard of living. So I guess what I'm trying to get across is that like ignorance is not complete defense to be responsible for some of the debt, but really the most important thing is when was the debt incurred and who was the recipient of the benefits of that debt.
Yeah. And to do on that, Julie, we talked about like the lifestyle that the parties were accustomed to when we were talking about spousal support. Not if that lifestyle was on debt that you can't afford. 'Cause
Yes,
I've seen
that's a good
people make
caveat.
that case, like, and that's not real.
Yeah.
Like, you may have lived that way, but you guys can't afford that anymore. So sometimes we have to have that reality talk with folks to understand.
Yes, and with alimony, that I know we didn't talk much about alimony tonight, but there's been some questions. The court also, even though they look at the lifestyle during the marriage, they're still cognizant that they're still taking the same pot of money and now trying to support two households. And so they will expect both parties to have a fair balance of sacrifice. So that can be interpreted however you want, but it means like it's probably not going to be the same as you. We can do as best we can to get you close to there, but there's probably going to have to be some cuts here and there.
Julie and Marty, if you guys could weigh in, I got a question today from a client about and it might be relevant for the whole team or participants, if she went and bought a house beforehand. I was talking how you guys talked about moving out before the divorce is over, but what happens if she actually buys the house? I know from my end what happens, but can you talk about that?
If you're still married, it is considered marital property. And unless you have a really great agreement and relationship with your soon-to-be ex, they have every right to say that's part of the marital estate, and any equity in that property needs to be added into the pot and considered when we split everything equally. So it's definitely I would advise against it.
But the debt goes into.
The debt goes into, that's a fair point, Marty. Yep.
Yeah. So I've had it in 2 cases, and when we're doing an agreement, we would explicitly waive the right. Like, someone will say, "This is owned." I'm waiving that when we have a mediated case. But yeah, actually, Tom and I had a case at that.
Yeah, he did go and say what he was going to do, but he did go ahead and buy the house. But that's marital property.
It is, and there'll be a waiver for it. But yeah, but that a lot of times when they do it, I don't know, Maggie, all the time, but I imagine there's a lot of maybe there's some debt that's going with it.
Yeah. But then, and also in Massachusetts, just at the real estate signing too, when you are married, they do need to sign at closing, but you can't some other states you can go buy a house and they don't have to sign, but not in Massachusetts.
Same thing with when you're trying to take out your retirement too. Like, I only knew that person. And my husband's, what do I have to sign? I'm like, yeah, I can't do. We were jointly moving it to a new place, but yeah, he had to sign, notarize everything so that I could.
Notarized, yeah.
Yeah, so there are some protections that people can't, so they can't dissipate the assets.
All right, great. That looks like all the Q&A that we had. Thank you to everyone for sticking with us for this hour and a half. We appreciate you being here and for your participation. We hope that you learned lots of things. We know that it was a lot that we threw at you tonight. Just please be assured you do not need to remember everything. We are here. You can reach out to us. We're happy to connect with you. And if you don't know which professional to start with, my recommendation is always start with someone like Lisa, a divorce coach who can be your guiding light and your beacon and help you feel steady and strong and connect with the rest of us. But we wish you the best as you move forward with this process. So thank you again and have a great night.
Night, everybody.
Good night.